Have you ever wondered what happens after we die? For centuries, scientists have been puzzled by the question of what exactly happens to humans after they die. Is there some mysterious event that overturns all our common understanding of death? For instance, it's common knowledge that the human body decomposes after death, and over time, every component of the body literally gets stripped off. But what if I told you that there are some people whose bodies have remained just so, even decades and decades after death? This might sound far-fetched at first, but it is indeed true, my friends. That is the interesting story of one nun named Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, whose body has apparently managed to defy normal time. Not only that, many bodies of Catholic saints have been left incorrupt. Saint Bernadette and Padre Pio still look alive. That might be our God's miracle, the marvelous preservation. The Catholic Church is full of mystery and miracles, those supernatural occurrences in time that display the power of God for eternity. Incorruptibility is one of those miracles, and Saint Bernadette is one of the saints chosen by God to show forth his power. Every Ash Wednesday, we hear, "You are dust, and unto dust you shall return." Death and decay are a fact of life for us mere mortals, all of us, that is, except for God's chosen few, the incorruptible. These are the saints throughout the history of the Church whose bodies have not decayed over time, even when millennia have passed, as in the case of Saint Cecilia, without their bodies turning to dust. The light of Christ has always shone brightest in times of darkness, and the 20th century was no exception. Certainly, it was a dark time of apostasy and the disintegration of customs. One light that shone brightly was the canonization of Saint Bernadette Soubirous, the visionary of Lourdes, France. 30 years after her death, the body of Saint Bernadette was found in a remarkable state of preservation. It could be viewed as ironic that the messenger of Our Lady at Lourdes, a place of healing, should be so burdened by illness throughout her natural life. It seems the miracle of Lourdes was not for her. As a matter of fact, in a vision, Our Lady said to Saint Bernadette, "I cannot promise you happiness in this life, only in the next." Born into a humble family that little by little fell into extreme poverty, Bernadette had always been a frail child. Quite young, she had already suffered from digestive trouble. Then, after having just escaped being a victim of the cholera epidemic of 1855, she experienced painful attacks of asthma. Her ill health almost caused her to be cut off forever from the religious life. When asked by Mother Superior of the Sisters of Nevers to take Bernadette, the Mother Superior replied, "Manner, she will be a pillar of the infirmary." She lived in the convent for 13 years, spending a large portion of this time, as predicted by the Mother Superior, ill in the infirmary. When a fellow nun accused her of being a lazy bones, Bernadette said, "My job is to be ill." She was gradually struck by other illnesses as well as asthma, among them tuberculosis of the lung and a tubercular tumor on her right knee. On Wednesday, April 16, 1879, her pain got much worse. Shortly after 11 a.m., she seemed to be almost suffocating and was carried to an armchair, where she sat with her feet on a footstool in front of a blazing fire. She died at about 3:15 in the afternoon, at the age of 35. Not a natural phenomenon. Over the course of the next 46 years, Saint Bernadette's body was exhumed no less than 3 times. The first time in 1909, then again in 1919, and finally in 1925. At the first exhumation, it was quickly evident that a miracle had taken place. Saint Bernadette's skin tone was perfectly natural, her mouth was slightly open, and it could be seen that the teeth were still in place. Although the rosary in her hands had decayed, showing rust and corrosion in some spots, the virginal hands that still grasped it were perfect. The sisters present thoroughly washed the body and clothed it in a new habit before placing it in an officially sealed double casket. The second exhumation in 1919 showed no further evidence of decomposition, though her hands and face had become somewhat discolored due to the well-intended washing given by the nuns 10 years prior. A worker in wax was commissioned to create a light wax mask of Saint Bernadette's hands and face. It was feared that although the body was preserved, the blackish tinge to the face and the sunken eyes and nose would make an unpleasant impression on the public. That brings us to 1946 and the final disturbing of Saint Bernadette's resting place. One of the doctors overseeing the final exhumation writes, "From this examination, I conclude that the body of the Venerable Bernadette is intact. The skeleton is complete. The muscles have atrophied but are well preserved. Only the skin, which has shriveled, seems to have suffered from the effects of the damp in the coffin. The body does not seem to have putrefied, nor has any decomposition of the cadaver set in, although this would be expected and normal after such a long period in a vault hollowed out of the earth. The doctor was amazed by the state of preservation of the liver. What struck me during this examination, of course, was the totally unexpected state of the liver. After 46 years, one would have thought that this organ, which is basically soft and inclined to crumble, would have decomposed very rapidly or would have hardened to a chalky consistency. Yet, it was soft and almost normal in consistency. I pointed this out to those present, remarking that this did not seem to be a natural phenomenon. This is truly the body of Bernadette, lifelike in her attitude of meditation and prayer. This is the face which was lifted 18 times to the Lady of Lourdes, the very same hands which fingered her rosary during the apparitions, and the fingers which scratched the earth in obedience to Our Lady's request and made the miraculous spring appear. It seems only right that our Lord would preserve perfectly those ears which heard the message of Lourdes and the lips which repeated the Lady's name to Father Peramol. I am the Immaculate Conception. This is the heart, too, which bore so much love for Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and sinners. Yes, how very sublime is the destiny of any Catholic who embraces the call of Christ to be a light shining in the darkness of whatever century he find himself in. And how sublime the destiny of those who find healing in the arms of she, who is the Immaculate Conception. Prayer and penance, our world seems to thirst for these things. In many ways, we seek them out, even setting aside good things we already have in our lives in pursuit of these ego boosters. Many of us, once we get there, realize fame, attention, and popularity don't make our lives better. Instead, they cloud our judgment and lead us away from our true selves and from God. While she was still a young girl, Saint Bernadette of Lourdes could have been swept from obscurity into the fame and attention that was pressed upon her. Instead, she put all the attention on the visions she had of Holy Mother Mary and shared her important message with the world, the need for prayer and penance. Then she hid herself from the crush of attention to preserve her thirst for God alone. Bernadette Soubirous was born January 7, 1844, in Lourdes, France. She was the oldest of 9 children, most of whom died at young ages. The family was extremely poor. Her father, François, was a miller, and her mother, Louise, was a laundress. While still a small child, Bernadette contracted cholera and struggled with very bad asthma, which continued for the rest of her life. Constant illness may have been the reason for her small size, as she stood only 4 feet 7 inches tall. But don't let her small stature fool you. The world would learn soon enough that she was a spiritual powerhouse. Bernadette had a hard time in school because she was sick so often. She could read and write only a little and spoke Occitan, the language of the local people, rather than French. Mother Vauves at the school in N that Bernadette attended noticed her pride and described her as having a closed character and being very touchy. By the time Bernadette was 14, her family was in such dire circumstances they were living in a one-room basement, once used as a jail. On February 11, 1858, she went out to gather firewood with one of her sisters and a friend near the grotto of Massimilla. While there, an extraordinary thing happened to Bernadette. As she walked a little behind the other girls, they crossed a stream in front of the grotto. Bernadette was choosing her steps carefully to avoid getting her stockings wet. She sat down by herself to remove her shoes and stockings to make the crossing. As the other girls walked ahead, she suddenly heard a rushing wind but saw nothing moving except a wild rose in a niche of the grotto. A dazzling light and white figure emerged from the alcove behind the niche. Bernadette later referred to the vision as a small young lady. Her sister and friend saw nothing. 3 days later, Bernadette returned to the grotto with another sister and friends. She saw the vision again, knelt down, and fell into a trance. Again, the other girls did not see the apparition. She returned to the grotto again on February 18th. This time, the vision asked her to return to the grotto each day for a fortnight. This time of visions was later called the Holy Fortnight. As people learned about the visions Bernadette was having, her parents tried to keep her from going to the grotto because they were embarrassed. Some believed her, and others thought she must have a mental illness and should be put into an asylum. No matter what others thought, Bernadette was determined to go to the grotto. Almost the entire time, the visions, 18 in total, occurred, Bernadette never identified the apparition as the Virgin Mary. The description she gave was much like that of statues of Mary in churches in the area, a woman wearing a white veil, a blue girdle, and with a yellow rose on each foot. It wasn't until the 16th vision that the white-veiled woman identified herself as the Virgin Mary, saying, "I am the Immaculate Conception." During her vision on February 25, Bernadette claimed the apparition told her to drink of the water of the spring, to wash in it, and to eat the herb that grew there. These things were to be done as an act of penance. Bernadette did as the woman asked her, and the next day, the water of the grotto that was once muddy was now flowing clear water. It would later become the place at Lourdes where millions of pilgrims pray and drink from the miraculous water to obtain healing. What else did Mary ask for during Bernadette's visions? She asked for a small chapel to be built for her on the site and a procession to be formed. Mary focused her message to Bernadette on the need for prayer and penance. But even at that young age, Bernadette noticed her own faults and fought to correct them. Her strong, unsophisticated personality would be a significant help in dealing with what was about to happen in her life. The story of Bernadette's visions of Mary traveled quickly. The Church investigated the visions and confirmed their authenticity. In 1862, many pilgrims traveling from around the world found healing and peace at Lourdes, and 69 cures have been verified by the Lourdes Medical Bureau during the Church's investigation. Bernadette's story never changed. She told her story with confidence and even detachment, telling one investigator, "I'm charged with telling you, not with making you believe." She never wanted to make a mistake in the retelling of her visions. At this point, her fame began to grow. Bernadette was bombarded by journalists, admirers, and even people trying to bribe her. She appeared multiple times in front of civil and religious commissions to tell her story. She held firm in her recounting of the visions, never accepted payment for anything offered, and refused to bless items such as rosaries handed to her by others. The attention never changed her. Can you picture this in today's world? Attention like that can often make people care about worldly things and feed a desire for fame. Our minds easily become engrossed in how many likes we got on Facebook, how long the interview was on the news, or how many people have texted us about our new fame. It's a rabbit hole that's hard to climb back out of. Bernadette held fast to her faith. Rather than let the attention pull her away from her Lord, she went to Nevers, France, and joined the Sisters of Charity on July 29, 1866. She was given the religious name of Marie Bernard, and her patron saint was Street Bernard. This time in her life was a turning point where she hid herself away from the outside world so the attention from the visions would stay with Mother Mary. At the monastery, she worked in the infirmary and as a sacristan. Those who served with her noticed her humility and spirit of sacrifice, and she still wanted no attention on herself. When someone once asked her about the visions, she told them, "The Virgin used me as a broom to remove the dust. When the work is done, the broom is put behind the door again." The illnesses of her childhood would catch up with Bernadette at the monastery. She contracted tuberculosis and eventually died from it on April 16, 1879, at the age of only 35. She was canonized by Pope Pius XI on December 8, 1933. Saint Bernadette is the patron saint of bodily illness, Lourdes, poverty, shepherds and shepherdesses, and people ridiculed for their faith, equilibrium, humility. It is impossible to think of the city of Lourdes today without associating it with the striking image of the shrine overflowing with the faithful who come there to implore a favor or grace from God through His Blessed Mother. But the reality was quite different on February 11, 1858, when Our Lady appeared for the first time to Bernadette Soubirous. The hard lot that usually accompanies the lives of those invested with a supernatural mission is that incomprehension and ingratitude are the coin in which they are paid on this earth for carrying out their charge. After all, what criminal endured more interrogations as exhausting as they were endless than the timid and vulnerable child that was Bernadette? What dramas, setbacks, and struggles did she not have to undergo in order to make public the call to conversion and the practice of penance, according to the express wish of the lady dressed in white who visited her in the grotto of Massabielle? The letters, personal notes, and copies of various texts of Saint Bernadette reveal to us a little of her spiritual way, that is, the sinuous inner paths along which Providence led her in order to accomplish a sublime mission. Once we have drawn back certain veils from the soul so dear to God and Our Lady, we will be able to get to know her more deeply so as to better imitate her virtues. As a starting point, let us focus our attention on a detail which surprised anyone who saw it: the psychological aspects outlined in her very regular and stable handwriting, characterized by the constant pressure of the firm and slanted pen, which does not fail to form the words elegantly. At one and the same time, Saint Bernadette's handwriting expresses various qualities that, a contrarious sense, contradict a certain unilateral and erroneous vision which aims to stigmatize the young woman as an inept or ignorant person. If her writings were dotted with grammatical lapses until the end of her life, This did not prevent her decisive and balanced character from finding expression in her writing. Thus, a sense of setting high ideals for herself, along with self-criticism, is latent in her beautiful script. In addition, Bernadette's handwriting reveals her effective inclination, that of someone overflowing with generosity and love for others, very sensitive to the treatment she received. It is no wonder that at the sight of a child, a bond was immediately established that encouraged them to approach her, to the point where little ones would flock around her. Finally, her penmanship suggests a penchant for solitude, perhaps because she did not find in others the models of virtue and rectitude she set for herself and sought after with such determination. A plan of life, expressed in her personal journal, it is worth pointing out that sanctification is not only the fruit of a divine gift. The conquest of holiness involves a constant struggle, from which not even the great mystics are exempt. On the contrary, God requires of his friends an uninterrupted and generally very difficult renunciation. When properly analyzed, the spiritual itinerary of these chosen souls turns out to be so, one might say, normal and ordinary that it fills everyone with hope. In one of her little notebooks of personal reflections, the title of the book sums up the plan she had outlined: Always do what costs more. In this light, Bernadette traced out for herself some goals which show her seriousness and persistence in the search for perfection, beginning with points related to the interior life. Never be discouraged. See God's holy will in everything that happens to me. Thank him for everything, thinking that it is for my greatest good that he permits it. Work to make myself indifferent to whatever my superiors or my companions say or think of me. Detach myself from everything to dedicate myself solely to pleasing God and saving my soul. To remember often this saying, God alone is good, and from him alone do I expect my reward. Never make personal friendships. Love all my sisters only to please God. Thanks to this virtuous conduct embraced from the time Our Lady confided to her the first yearnings at Massabielle, the seer was able to sum up holiness in a few short phrases pervaded with both theology and charity, and applicable to any baptized person who aspires to reach heaven. A good nun must ask God for more humility than humiliation, more patience than suffering, more will than works, more love than actions, more surrender than orders, more acts than words, more application to sanctity than to health. And still in this vein, with the aim of clarifying for herself and for the future the axis around which the daily life of a consecrated soul must revolve, the saint would affirm, a religious must live in mortification like a fish in water. It is not the same when a religious is not mortified. Serious application to all duties necessarily leads to the exercise of continual mortification at all times. If one does not mortify oneself, duty is lacking. Where do the violations of the rule and the vows come from? Where does the laxity of some communities come from? They come from not putting into practice or not maintaining the exercise of mortification. In my opinion, a mortified system could enter heaven without passing through the flames of purgatory. From her fiat, Providence chose Bernadette, though unknown and shut away in a convent, to be a living and valuable lesson of what Lourdes was to mirror for the whole world, the miracle of accepting pain, suffering, and even defeat and failure, if necessary. If we are astonished to learn that a young girl had been chosen to be the spokeswoman of the Immaculate Conception, to found the world's most prolific pilgrimage site for miracles, we should be equally enthusiastic about her austere life, punctuated with so many privations of little things. But that is not what seems to happen. When we look around us and consider the miseries of human nature fallen through original sin, we realize that such an act of self-giving and abnegation is far removed from our selfishness, causing us only a timid admiration or even a certain aversion. It is clear that sanctification is a gratuitous favor from God, but this should not give rise to the false idea that he does not desire our active participation in its attainment. Since life is warfare, therefore, if Bernadette's private notes clearly reveal her confidence and the copied writings suggest her preferences and profound choices, her letters deserve special attention. They touch the soul deeply, for they express the dominant virtues of this spirituality full of light and equilibrium, humility, and faith. One example will suffice to prove it: the letter addressed to Pope Pius IX, at the request and insistence of a priest, Bishop Lyon, dated December 17, 1876. Most Holy Father, I would never have dared to take up the pen to write to your Holiness, I, a poor little sister. I was afraid at first of being too indiscreet. Then it occurred to me that our Lord likes to be bothered by the little as well as the great, the poor as well as the rich, and that he gives himself to each one of us without distinction. This thought gave me courage, so I no longer fear. I come to you, Holy Father, like a poor child to the most tender of parents, full of abandonment and trust. What can I do, most Holy Father, to bear witness to you of my filial love? I can only continue to do what I have done up to now, suffer and pray. Some years ago, I made myself, though unworthy, your Holiness's little Zov. My weapons are prayer and sacrifice, which I will keep until my last breath. Only the weapon of sacrifice will be left behind, but the weapon of prayer will follow me to heaven, where it will be much more powerful than in this land of exile. Who could doubt that the spiritual path of Saint Bernadette was summed up in these two words, to suffer and to pray? Her life attests to the fact that only prayer and suffering were capable of guaranteeing her stability in the practice of virtue, even when she was met with misfortune and misunderstandings over the course of her earthly pilgrimage. It is not without reason that one of the criteria of prudence adopted by the Church in verifying the authenticity of particular revelations, such as those which Bernadette received, consists in carefully and meticulously analyzing the conduct of the seers. The decisive testimony will be that of their life. Even more than being a herald of the supernatural and a herald of the Virgin, by her words, Bernadette took on her mission to such a degree that her life became a call to conversion, at least as effective as the miraculous waters that bathed the grotto of Lourdes. Her death, an invitation to penance, and her body, almost untouched by the decomposition caused by the evils of original sin, a sign of the glory bestowed on her once the threshold of her earthly pilgrimage was crossed. Thus, from April 16, 1879, the day of her death, until the present day, Saint Bernadette remains for all Christendom an instrument of the maternal tenderness of Mary and of the merciful power of her Son to restore the world in Christ through a new and incomparable outpouring of the redemption. If the corruption of flesh is the cost of the fall, then it's intimately entwined with human sin. Perhaps someone who lives a holy and sinless life may be differently subject to this corruption. God may allow some evidence of this difference to inspire us. The witness of Sanct Ity is another important consideration. Bodies are exhumed and examined after a cause for canonization is already well underway. Preservation at the time of exhumation may be meant to show the postulator for the cause that they're on the right track. Incorruptibility is rarely primary evidence in a case for canonization, but like dessert, it's a nice added extra. We often forget that the promise of Christianity is not a blessed eternity for the soul in heaven. The promise of Christianity is the resurrection of the glorified body to eternal life. The body matters, maybe sometimes for no reason other than to inspire people and make them look and talk and wonder. God gives us a little foretaste of that. Of her last suffering, Bernadette said, "All this is good for heaven." Her life and her death point the way and inspire. If someone looks at that strangely serene face, even under its layer of wax, and feels moved to holiness, then the miracle has a purpose. Faith doesn't stand or fall on incorruptible saints. It's something extra, something wonderful, and wonder is a beautiful thing.